guys are professional athletes. You don't ever hit a guy blatantly after the bell like that.
Mike Pierce is verbally saying, I'm done. He's tapping. Keith Peterson is jumping here on top of them to stop this fight.
Finally, he let it go, but yeah, I'm going to cut him too.
Some of the best fighters from all over the world join the UFC roster, and each has their unique journey with the company. That being said, even the best fighters will leave the Ultimate Fighting Championship at some point, which has led to many fighters previously leaving the UFC. Whether they retire, get released, or just choose to be a free agent. Still, when an athlete leaves a sport, there's usually at least a chance they will come back at some point. The 10 fighters we're about to talk about, on the other hand, are definitely the exception to that. This episode is about a few MMA stars who blew their chances of getting back into the UFC because they did things that Dana White and the rest of the UFC staff thought were inappropriate enough to get them banned. These are 10 fighters who aren't allowed to fight in the UFC anymore. 1. Paul Daley. Many UFC fans remember Paul "Semtex" Daley's short time in the UFC. Daley fought in and won his first 2 fights in the UFC against Martin Kampmann and Dustin Hazelett. At UFC 113, he was in a title qualifying fight. Josh Koscheck, who used to be on Ultimate Fighter, would be his opponent. Between them, they talked a lot of trash before and during their highly awaited fight, but Koscheck's wrestling skills helped him easily win by decision. Because of the result of the match and his opponent's taunting, Daley chose to sucker punch his rival after the bell. Because of this, Dana White banned the skilled fighter from the UFC for good.
These guys are professional athletes. You don't ever hit a guy blatantly after the bell like that.
White said, "These guys play professional sports. You never hit a guy like that after the bell rings. That will never be okay, and he's done with it."
He will never fight in the UFC ever again.
The ban has never been lifted, even though he has done well outside the UFC. 2. Rousimar Palhares. Rousimar Palhares, known for his unique fighting style, was once known as the fighter who had the best ground game in all of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. However, it became a big problem when he wouldn't give up on submissions after his opponents tapped out. Palhares was banned for 90 days after winning UFC 111 because he didn't release a heel hook after defeating his opponent. He did the same thing again in 2013 against Mike Pierce, which put him in another submission hold that he wouldn't let go of even though Pierce tapped him 8 times. Palhares was fired from the UFC because Dana White had enough. White said, "He's done."
Just a suspension, he's done.
He's done.
3. Matt Riddle. Matt Riddle shot to fame and became very well known in the UFC world after he won the Ultimate Fighter 7. He did an excellent job for the company. Riddle's time in mixed martial arts was cut short due to his marijuana use. Riddle had failed 2 tests for weed in the course of 1 year. This made Dana White, the boss of the UFC, dislike him a lot. He said, "You're so weak-minded and so addicted to marijuana that you couldn't stay off it enough to pass a drug test 3 times a year."
You're so weak-minded and so addicted to marijuana that you couldn't stay off it enough to pass a drug test 3 times a year. Well, guess what, dummy? They drug test in the real world, too.
White made it clear that Riddle would not be able to come back when he was asked about his freedom. In the end, Riddle had a good run in WWE, but he could have had an excellent 9-3 record in the UFC. 4. War Machine. Jonathan Copenhaver used to be known as War Machine. He fought twice in the UFC but became famous for how he behaved when he wasn't in the cage. Assaulting his ex-girlfriend, adult film star Christy Mack, was one of the 29 felonies War Machine was found guilty of in 2017. He was given a 36-year sentence of life in jail without the chance of parole. War Machine can't fight in the UFC again because he has a criminal past. 5. BJ Penn. BJ Penn was one of the biggest names in MMA. He is now in the UFC Hall of Fame and was a 2-division world champion. Even though Penn was famous, his career finished badly with a 7-fight losing streak. Dana White said, he won't fight again after a video showed Penn getting into a fight in a bar. That's it.
You see videos come out of him, in an altercation in Hawaii. What were your thoughts when you saw those videos?
He won't fight again.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
6. Randy Couture. Randy Couture, a 6-time UFC champion, is one of the most decorated fighters in UFC history. However, Couture's departure from the UFC wasn't on good terms. After signing with Spike TV, which was affiliated with Bellator at the time, Couture was banned from cornering his son Ryan Couture during his UFC debut in 2013. Despite his accomplishments, Couture remains on the outs with Dana White.
Corner him. Randy Couture can't buy a ticket to this mother.
7. Ruslan Magomedov. Ruslan Magomedov, a dedicated fighter from Dagestan, was a strong heavyweight who had a perfect 3-0 record in the UFC. However, his problems with the U.S. anti-doping agency, USADA, ended his career. Magomedov failed repeated tests for illegal drugs, including anabolic steroids. Magomedov was the first UFC fighter to get a lifetime ban from USADA in 2019 for refusing to turn in a sample. However, this refusal also led to Dana White's refusal to let him inside the octagon again, marking the end of the fighter's career in the UFC. 8. Caleb Starnes. People who followed Caleb Starnes in the UFC will remember the famous fight at UFC 83. In the fight, Caleb avoids and runs away from his opponent, Nate Quarry. This poor performance angered all UFC and MMA fans, who gave him a new nickname, the Running Man. However, while the fans did show their frustration and anger, UFC President Dana White did not like it one bit and was furious. Starnes was kicked out of the UFC after the fight. Many people believe that there might be other reasons for Dana to kick him out, but one of the major reasons was this performance. 9. Jason Mayhem Miller. Some people know Jason Mayhem Miller from his time in mixed martial arts and on the MTV show Bully Beatdown. On May 26, 2012 at UFC 146, Miller was scheduled to fight CB Dollaway. The fight was going in favor of Jason in the start after he dropped Dollaway with a right hand. However, Jason injured his left knee during the fight and was overpowered by Dollaway for the rest of the fight, eventually losing the battle. Miller had previously posted a tweet stating that he would retire if he lost this fight, but Dana White opted to fire Miller one day after his loss to Dollaway. Miller was fired from the UFC after his second run, which ended with 2 wins and some crazy incidents behind the scenes. Miller later came out with a brief confrontation with UFC backstage official Burt Watson over Miller's attempt to wear a colorful paper bag over his face and a gas mask for his walkout. These unique and weird wardrobe choices made Dana White call him a clown before the fight and eventually fire him.
Come on, man. Take this thing serious. You want to be a clown? You can do that later. Do that on your reality show.
10. Thiago Silva. Thiago Silva was a good all-around boxer, but legal problems ended his time in the UFC. According to reports, Silva made threats against Pablo Popovich and his ex-wife Thesa Kamiji, who was seeing Popovich at his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu center in Oakland Park, Florida on February 6, 2014. On February 5th, Kamiji reported Silva to the cops for breaking a temporary protection order. Authorities charged Silva with aggravated battery and non-violently resisting an officer. The charges were later lowered to aggravated assaults by a Broward County judge, who also thought Silva would try to escape and refused to give him bond. President of the UFC Dana White said Silva would never fight in the UFC again after Silva was arrested. The UFC officially let him go later that same day. However, a Florida judge dropped all criminal charges against Silva on September 4, 2014. Silva was re-signed by the UFC the next day, September 5th, after the criminal charges were dropped. But on September 19th, the UFC let him go because of new video and audio evidence. This was the last time Silva had been seen as a UFC fighter. That wraps up the video. If you enjoyed this video, please show us your support by liking our video and subscribing to our YouTube channel with the bell notifications on so you never miss another upload on our channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.